And welcome back. So we're going to continue our discussion on Educated, looking at 7 major themes in the memoir. I had initially thought about doing a little bit more here, and then I found for you guys this great interview with the author herself, and I think that I'd rather have you hear her talk than me, I guess, is what it comes down to. So if you are in my class, that's going to be in Blackboard. And if you're not in my class, I'm going to post the link either as the first comment or possibly in the description. So take a look for that because there are a lot of interviews with her. This one's about 45 minutes long, but it is worth it. It's a really great discussion. And she talks about her perspective on the book and her experiences a year later after doing a book tour, and also how it kind of relates to the situation in our country today. Though I will say, depending on when you're watching this, right now we are still in the midst of quarantining and social distancing for the coronavirus, and it was before that. But by the time you see this, if you're in my class, it'll be quite a bit later, hopefully. So at any rate, let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about here is memory, and I almost hate to start this way, but there are a couple things that I want to acknowledge. This is from a family representative. I don't know if it's the lawyer or just someone who represents them for the press, but you've seen the summary, and I talked about they're living in poverty, they're survivalists, they're fundamentalists, and they do cause her quite a bit of trauma, her Tara's parents. So the representative said, Tara's parents are disappointed Tara would write a book that maligns them, their religion, their country, and homeschooling. The premise is that they started teaching the older kids, but by the time they got to her, they neglected her schooling. Tara is one of 7 children, 3 of whom have gone on to earn a PhD. Tara, Tyler, and Richard, said Atkin. That's 42% of their children. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a public school with those statistics. So I kind of took this and then looked for what other people in her family had said, and her brother, who had gone to school before her and still has a good relationship with her, also had a statement. Tara's brother Tyler stated, I have received some negative comments on the review above. I cut that because he's basically just giving a review of the book. But anyway, from people who think that I am trying to impose my experiences on Tara. That really is not my intention. In her book, in numerous places, Tara interprets for me and other family members of my family things that we did, said, thought, and even felt. I cannot speak for the other members of my family, but in my case, I think in many instances she greatly incorrectly conveyed my experiences. In the interest of a balanced viewpoint, it seems that I should at least attempt to share part of my perspective while still supporting her as much as I can. I do recognize that this is her memoir, and she describes her experiences from her paradigm. So I think that these two different statements are interesting. First, and I only bring it up here because there is some controversy about the book. Some, not a whole lot, because it has been fact checked. These things did happen. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, of course, if you are Tara's parents, whose names she changes for the book, she also changes the names of some of her other siblings. I believe Tyler, I don't think she changes Tyler's name. But if you are saying these people caused me trauma, they allowed me to be physically abused, they put my life at risk, they are, kind of cuckoo banana types, of course, they are not going to take that well. And of course, they are going to be disappointed, hurt, upset. That does not mean that what she's saying is false. So you'll notice, too, that even the representative does not say, hey, that yes, they neglected her schooling. Or know that the representative, does not say no, they never neglected her schooling. They had a rigorous course of study. That's not what he's saying there. 3 of their 7 children have gone on to earn PhDs, and so that's something that should be taken into account. The story of that is in the book, so I don't want to give too much of that away, but essentially Tyler learned, I believe that Richard had more formal education before the family isolated more. So that's one thing. The second thing is that Tyler basically takes things into his own hands. He had some formal education. He gets books out to learn math, to study more, and then takes the ACT, gets into BYU, and then basically encourages her to do the same thing. The other thing that I will say here is that this is coming from her brother's point of view. As he says, it's her memoir. She's describing things from her paradigm, from her point of view. Tara herself in the book will say at several points, this is how I remember things. There's a couple footnotes where she asks her brother if he remembers, something that happened. He remembers it slightly differently, and she notes that. But also, this is coming from a male's point of view in a patriarchal family. And so while he's saying that he doesn't want to impose his experiences upon her, the part of the review that I cut, that did seem what was going on. And so I think that's just something to keep in mind as well. Memory is a slippery thing. There are things when I talk to my own brother that I remember a family vacation that he doesn't even remember taking. And he was like 12 at the time, old enough to remember, right? Not like he was 2 or 3. There's other things where, say somebody had a fight or something went on at school. And again, I see it one way and he sees it another way. And then we both interpret it in different ways as well, right? So that's kind of the nature of a memoir, and I don't want you to look up things like this with people kind of trying to tear it down and say, well, this is all a bunch of nonsense and what she's writing isn't true, because that's not what's going on at all. And so I think we kind of talked about it a little bit before with Maya Angelou's book as well. You're editing certain pieces, you're adding other pieces in, and Tara talks about this in her interview. She says there were some things that, were kind of more exciting and would have been exciting to read, but didn't really fit in the story. There are other things that might have been more boring to read, and then she cut those out too. So at any rate, it's interesting to hear about her experiences from her point of view, and I hope that you, accept them for what they are. So, number 2, a theme in the book is the survivalist mentality. Have the picture of doomsday preppers there, because I think it's something that people can relate to if you've seen the show. It's on a lot in reruns. I think some seasons are on Netflix, some seasons are on Prime. The Westover family really is ruled by fear and paranoia. And if you watch Doomsday Preppers, you get kind of a feeling of that, but not completely. And it's portrayed a little bit more humorously for the audience. But this is something that was real. There is constant paranoia, constant fear. They have a mistrust of the government, education and public schools, medicine, anyone outside of their religion. People of color really are not even ever mentioned. In fact, there's one incident where she reads this book that is a very twisted version of the Civil War and slavery, the history of slavery, basically saying, this was hard on the plantation owners. I mean, so this is what I mean by isolation is it's not just isolation geographically. They are on top of a mountain, but they are really isolated from outside thoughts and ideas. And because of that, it's easy for the patriarch, the father of the family, to have crazy ideas and then impose them upon the other members of the family. So with this, fear seems to exist in the background when Tara is very young. It's really becomes more prominent with the incident at Ruby Ridge. And she doesn't go into detail in this in the book because she's explaining this from her perspective. So I wanted to give you this little bit of sort of historical information. Ruby Ridge is also in Idaho, which is where the story takes place. And there was an 11-day siege. The United States Marshal Service attempted to arrest Randy Weaver, and also his friend, though I left his name out of here just for the sake of not giving you guys too many names. So Randy Weaver was up on firearms charges. He was supposed to come to court, and he failed to appear. So the U.S. Marshal Service went in to try to arrest him, and it was the Marshals because he had so many weapons. Weaver said he would not surrender, and the FBI then became involved. During the Marshal Service, they're reconning the property. 6 marshals encounter Harris and Sammy, which is the other man, and Sammy Weaver, who is Randy's 14-year-old son, in the woods near the family cabin, and a shootout takes place. His wife, Vicky, his 14-year-old son, their family dog, and a U.S. Marshal all died as a result of this shootout. And this happened within the first 2 days. The rest of the time, they were basically holed up there with guns, trying not to let the feds take them, essentially. And it didn't even end with the... essentially what happened was that a civilian, somebody from that town, was able to help with negotiations and eventually got Randy and his friend to surrender. So he was actually acquitted of the firearms charges except for the failure to appear. So he served a little bit of time for failure to appear in court. And then he sued those government agencies for damages and for the loss of life of his son, his wife, his dog, and won $3.1 million in damages. So it was later found that, he was not guilty. But what happens is that this is not far from Tara's family. Her father finds out about this, and it propels him further into this idea that the federal government is coming for him. And that I showed you guys the picture the last time of the protest, that they came for the Weavers, they can come for us. And so stockpiling weapons, training his children in survivalist techniques, all of this is really, if you want to talk about literary elements, this is really part of the setting. And her house is not a house of refuge or peace. It is really a house of fear. So this is a short clip from Doomsday Preppers. And I picked this one specifically. This guy is not training his children with exactly with guns, but he believes in survivalism, and he believes in primitive methods of survival, and it particularly you can kind of think about how it would impact his kids. So I want you to think about not just, haha, this is kind of funny, this guy's crazy, but really, if you are his son, if you are his daughter, how would this affect you if this is what you're going through every day of your life?
Live on a farm that produces food and have 400 gallons of water caches. Michael fears they could become a target in an overpopulated world. So he has developed his very own alarm system to warn them of dangerous marauders in search of provisions.
Out here in the rural areas, people are going to be spilling out to take what farmers have. I'm not going to allow my family to be a target. I've had the opportunity to play with thermal imagery cameras, motion detectors, early detection systems of all kinds. You know what I use? Bird feeders. Birds alarm at the most subtle of threats. By listening to the bird alarms, you have awareness of people approaching.
Every bird produces a different sound, and each of their calls communicates a particular meaning, a language Michael has studied for over 2 decades and is now passing on to his children.
What's that?
Not hatch.
What's
Chickadee.
that? Good.
Today, Michael is teaching Emily about the importance of the robin's distress call, which he believes could give the family a full 5 minutes to prepare for any approaching danger.
All right, this one's not out, but tell me what it is, because it's really important. Ready?
Robin's alarm?
Yeah, know that one. That means somebody's coming with a lot of angry energy, okay? When you have a kid who can hear that 300 yards away in the din of society, their awareness is amped.
Most preppers stock up on firearms for self-defense. But Michael does not possess guns. He believes that overpopulation would cause ammunition to become a finite resource, and he does not want to be dependent on it.
You don't need to rely on bright, shiny objects like knives and other guns. Instead, plug into the landscape to see what it can offer you.
Instead, his lethal weapon of choice is made simply from an oak tree and a railroad spike.
Nice. Other side. Excellent. Take it and chop it right to the base of the head. Boom.
Dakota has practiced throwing tomahawks for over 7 years, and he also has martial arts training. Today, Michael is combining both of these skills to teach Dakota a new tomahawk technique that he could use to fight potential invaders inside their home.
Right? Guiding right on. Boom. You're holding the blades, and now you have your blocks.
Okay, so they show him doing that with his younger daughter as well, and then they practice throwing a throwing stick, which is not just a regular stick, but a throwing stick. And then this is the final kind of demonstration that this is what he is doing, it seems like, on kind of a regular basis.
For danger at any moment, whether they have a weapon or not. So he conducts self-defense drills every day, multiple times a day, and often without warning.
My kids are in there playing right now, so what I want to do is give them kind of an awareness drill. You know, this is how they start to evolve their skill sets. So, with that in mind, let's go have some fun. Hands in the air. Hands in the air now. What do you do? Both hands.
Yoga!
All right, good. Not bad.
Yeah, not bad for 2-year-olds.
I get moments where people think that I'm crazy or too far gone all the time. Is it all worth it? Yeah. Wouldn't trade it for the world.
So here's the thing. I think, you can see that he cares about his kids, right? There we go. And at first when you're watching this, it's like, well, he has some kind of nutty ideas, but or maybe be a little bit paranoid, but he is teaching his daughter about birds. They're outside, they're learning these things. But you can see, I hope, underneath that, and it's not shown because of the editing, but imagine different music in the background. Your kids are playing and you come up on them with a fake gun and you want them to take it away from you because that's part of their training. Going through that part of survivalist training day in and day out, and it's so normalized that you can see this kid in the background. He continues playing while all this is going on. That's how used to this he is. So, that's a lot. It reminded me a lot. There they are doing the axes. It reminded me a lot of this book because it really shows you just a glimpse into what life is like for these children, and how the paranoia might affect them down the road. For these kids, it's not really clear, but definitely you can see how it affects Tara. And as time goes on, it doesn't get better. It gets worse. And it's also tied into fundamentalism. So there is this picture of Osama bin Laden. This is not my slide, but I wanted to, I like this part of it at any rate. And this is what fundamentalism leads to. Dualism. Fundamentalism divides the world into binary categories. So good and evil, right and wrong, us versus them. Paranoia deep feeling of suspicion or rage toward those who are on the wrong side, apocalyptic orientation, an obsession with the ultimate end of society or end of humanity, charismatic leadership, often accompanied by kind of a cult of leadership. There's some type of charismatic leader. Total conversion experience. Now, that one you might not see in this book, but I think maybe you do, embracing the ideology and doing so completely. So this is not just, if you're, I want to say this very clearly too, and I would talk about this more in class, I guess, if people wanted to know, but I am a person of faith and a fairly conservative faith. What we're talking about is not just going to church. What we're talking about is really these kind of things, that it's not just that you have a belief system, but that everyone else is completely evil and to be avoided, and you're going to isolate yourself from them. Because they're evil, you're suspicious of them and you're angry at them, and you think that because there's more of them than there are of you, the end of the world is coming, right? So all of those three things kind of go together. The charismatic leader in this case really is Tara's father, who controls everything in the household, and it is ruled by his moods, by his behavior. There are other people who are Mormon in the book as well, so you're going to see that and a little bit of the structure, but for the most part the family is following the father's lead. So yeah, what they were really thinking initially, so with the binary system, the dualism that's talked about there, is that not even the Mormon church, which would be small in and of itself, but that only certain members of the Mormon church are good. And so when she goes to college with other Mormons, she sees what they're wearing and thinks, well, they're not real Mormons because of what they're wearing. And she's looking for more people like her, but she really has been brought up almost like in a cult kind of way. The government is evil, so relying on the government doesn't just mean that it'll be bad for you, but that you're going against God. If you take a government handout, if you take a student loan, if you are on welfare, then you're relying on the government instead of relying on God, and they're evil, and then therefore you're of the devil. That's kind of how their thinking goes. The same thing goes for medicine. Doctors are all evil and bad and don't know what they're talking about, and so just fix it with herbs, we'll figure it out. And certainly public schools, being a government institution, they want to indoctrinate you. They're going to pull you away from us, from our faith. So it's not just harmful to go to a doctor, but it's sinful and evil. At one point in the book, in college, I think it's that she has a headache, and her friend recommends that she take a Tylenol, and she doesn't want to do, or an earache. She doesn't want to take Tylenol because she feels like that's sinful. And so even with this horrible ear infection, this is how much those thoughts pervade into every aspect of her life. Paranoia then follows from that, and then they're trying to get kind of ready, not necessarily for an apocalypse, but definitely for government intervention. And I think, gosh, possibly rightfully so, some of the things that are going on with these kids, if they had been found out, the children might have been removed from them. But Tara makes it very clear that these are not beliefs that are held by all Mormons, and definitely not by all Christians. A lot of this is being run because of the mental illness suffered by her parents. At any rate, it's used to control and oppress her and her siblings, but particularly the women in the family. So that... Oh, here we go. Yeah, Dad said that public school was a ploy by the government to lead children away from God. And that is a quote from the book, and how that affects them. And again, it's not just regular homeschooling. A lot of people who homeschool think the public schools aren't great, and therefore we should have an alternative. And I think that I know a lot of people who homeschool, and they do a wonderful job. But here it's just neglect, and it's part of that fundamentalist paranoid idea. Which leads us to gender roles. So I really liked this. This is from a person who does some illustrations. They're called the Naked Pastor. I think they are actually a pastor. I don't know why they call themselves that, but I don't know if you can read this. But at any rate, at the top of the pyramid, any kind of man. I would actually have split this further, at least in terms of this book. It is definitely white men first, and then possibly people of color, or possibly then stay-at-home married women with children. Underneath that, stay-at-home married women with no children. Underneath that, married women with or without kids who works outside the home. And then any other woman. So that would include an unmarried woman with children who works. That would include a single woman. And definitely a female child would be really at the bottom, having no power whatsoever. And this gender pyramid is in this book in a way that it's interesting. A lot of people that I've heard talk about the education, talk about the poverty, talk about the paranoia, they haven't really, many of them at least, haven't gotten into the fact that a lot of the things that happen to Tara happen because she is a girl in a patriarchal family. And initially her mother is not allowed to work. Her father has difficulty finding or keeping a real job before he has the junkyard, and even after, when he needs more money. So then he basically decides what his wife can or cannot do. And at first, when she begins to work, she does not want to do it. Tara's mom is kind of afraid of being a midwife. She's worried about catching babies, as they call it, when you're being a midwife. And she just thinks, oh, well, I made a little money off of this, now I can stop. But eventually she's kind of forced into doing this by her husband. So, it's an acceptable job in his mind. She's bringing in money for the family in a way that he accepts. She also becomes an herbalist. So she does have a skill for treating, problems with herbs and medicinal plants. But again, it's not until later in the book, and actually I think after the book, and now Tara's parents together run a fairly successful herbalist company. But at that time and during her childhood, they did not. And so this is something that's sort of born out of necessity, with her mother finding a little bit of empowerment, bit by bit. But the expectation for Tara herself is that she'll marry and have children. So her brothers get some education, but hers is completely neglected, and it's sort of implied that the education of her sisters is neglected as well. Yeah, so I kind of said that already. And then the strict gender rules are not just you're going to be married and have kids and probably be a stay-at-home mom, and so you're near the top of the pyramid, but you're not the man, right? The strict gender roles seep into other aspects of her life. She is not allowed to wear certain things. When she finally goes and buys clothes for herself, she doesn't even feel comfortable in her own skin. Her self-esteem is kind of in the toilet a lot because of her gender. Her dating and her sex life are extremely complicated. She doesn't know how to read signals from guys. She doesn't understand how to flirt, which is not unusual for somebody when they're younger. But by the time she doesn't have some of the normal teenage experiences, and even in college, it's still complex and complicated. And her views on other women, judging other women, what they're wearing, what they're doing, how they're presenting themselves, if they wear makeup, for example, if they have shorter hair, shorter skirts, if they're wearing things that she doesn't find appropriate. And also her relationship with her family. And I really would like you to pay attention to how different family members fit into these gendered patterns. So Tara's brother who goes to college, Tyler, the other brother who physically abuses her, her sister. At one point, her sister is married, and so she tries to talk to her sister about some things, and her sister's life now is basically ruled by her husband. So then there's kind of that continuation of going from one patriarchal system to another. So, and also how they fight against this, especially what kind of things Tara's mom does to get around the imperious rule of her father. So those are some things I would like you to look for in this book. Poverty is another theme that is the mountain that is talked about in the book in Idaho. According to the National Advisory Committee on Rural Health, there are more children living in poverty in rural areas than in urban settings, which is kind of surprising. I think that a lot of people would think that it was the opposite, but the committee found that, quote, with reductions in available resources, poverty has been shown to increase the number of hardships and affect one's ability to provide and meet basic needs. Moreover, the experience of growing up poor disrupts vital brain regions that result in difficulties with emotional regulation, executive function capacities such as working memory, and learning. Poverty is also associated with elevated psychological parental distress, maternal depression, insecure attachment between child, parent, and caregiver, and a chaotic home and community conditions, which could include violence. Furthermore, poverty and low income levels contribute to a greater likelihood of health burdens. So, how we see these come out in the memoir. This picture of the system is the problem outside a house that's kind of fallen apart. Some of these factors play a really obvious role in this memoir. Tara's father may be mentally ill. She, I think, tries to kind of diagnose him after taking some psychology classes, and I don't want to give that part away. Her mother may be depressed there, at least at certain times. So the maternal depression seems to be there. There's certainly a chaotic home environment. Some of the stories about what happens in this junkyard and how precarious the situation that they're put in. But so the children are in the junkyard looking for scrap metal in really dangerous conditions. But her parents are willing to put their children at risk if it means bringing in money for their family. This is something that they kind of see as a necessity. So when Tara wants to go to school, her dad's like, who's going to be in the junkyard getting scrap metal? How are you better come home at all your breaks and possibly on weekends to come and help do this. And the medical and health issues that was talked about also, they are really inherent in impoverished populations, meaning that if you don't have money, you're not going to go to a doctor if it's, I'm going to a doctor or I'm eating dinner. And I don't know in this book if Tara's dad had the belief first that the medical establishment was wrong, and so therefore he refuses to let people go to doctors, or if that partially came out of the fact that he didn't want to go to the doctor because he didn't have enough money, and therefore over time the medical establishment is evil. It's not really clear, but I really want you to pay attention to the medical abuse and neglect, because there are some serious situations here, major concussions and other issues where not seeking medical treatment really is a form of abuse. Poverty also adds to their isolation, and it allows for that abuse to continue because nobody knows it's going on. And the idea, and again, Tara talks about this in the interview I'm going to post for you guys, that why does this also contribute to paranoia? The government doesn't care about me, my family, my community, my roads, my school, my safety, so therefore I cannot and should not trust them. If your only interaction with the government is that they kind of plow the roads when they feel like it, and that they don't really have police to ensure your safety, and the schools are falling apart, then what has the government done for you? Really nothing. And then you have a situation with a lot of people who are angry, and those people are going to vote for whoever taps into that anger and tells them that they can make things better. So all of these things really are interconnected, and it was hard for me even to do this presentation today because separating poverty and isolation from survivalism is almost impossible, that it's connected together. Education and freedom, however, is not really connected with these things, and this is a picture of Trinity College in England at Cambridge. So here we are at last. It's the title of the novel, and it's possibly the central theme. Education is a way out from all of these things. It represents growth and opportunity. I think that this could be kind of a simplistic view of the book, and I'm not going to get too much into education because it really is central to the memoir, and you can see it on every page. What it symbolizes and what she learns and what she didn't know before going in. So obviously, yes, going to college finally opened her eyes to the world. It's a world beyond what her parents have presented her. She doesn't just learn subject matter. She is learning new ways of seeing and thinking about life. And I think that this is one of the problems that I see with how people talk about college now. They say, well, you just need to go to college to get a good job. Yeah, employability is one of the goals. And probably, especially if you're in poverty or if you are struggling, it's the main goal. I want to get a better job, or I want to build skills, which is kind of below even getting a job, right? I need skills so that I can get a new job or a better job. But also, it really is about connections, learning about the world, and having a better life. That's the life that Tara leads now. She's not going to be unsafe walking around a junkyard, right? The way that she was previously. And not that people can't do those jobs, but certainly typically 9-year-old or 10-year-old or 17-year-old girls don't do them, at least not in an unsafe manner. But this is a change in her entire life that affects how she relates to her family, what friends she chooses, the career path that she's able to have, the places she's able to go. Never in her life did she think that she would be going to England, growing up in rural Idaho, with parents who kind of looked at everybody else as if they were evil. So yeah, a lot of people today think that college is a waste of time. Not everybody needs it, and not everyone necessarily needs it. I think that there's a lot to be said for trade schools as well, as traditional colleges. And I really like that I work at a school that has both. We have liberal arts programs and we have trade programs. But Tara's father feels this way, at least when it comes to education outside of his very small world. And especially, it says possibly, but I meant to say especially there, especially education for women. That her brother is only encouraged to go to school because he's going to do something that will help the family. Tara, on the other hand, is almost shut out completely. And I do know someone that this happened to. She grew up in a fundamentalist household, and when she decided to go to college, her family, unlike Tara's still keeps in contact with her in the book anyway. But this girl's family completely disowned her, and she was going to college to be a nurse, and they they really didn't talk to her for about 2 years. And then she went to a church that they didn't really approve of, and that kind of tacked another year on. It really wasn't until she was getting married that they fully reconciled with her. And so, you know, these things do still go on. And again, education is, I forgot about that picture. Education is freedom for Tara, and it gives her opportunities she would never have had, and a life that she would never have had. But the other thing I do want you to think about, this is why I said, you know, if you just look at the parts of the book that take place in BYU, in Harvard, in Cambridge, then you're not really seeing the other part of her education. So think about her childhood and early teen years. What education does she get on the mountain? What things does she learn there that she might not have learned from traditional public schools? I do think that there's some value there, and her parents want her to learn about life skills. They are encouraging her to try to possibly become a midwife like her mom. They want to teach her herbalism, the canning, but there's other things there too. So, yeah, so watch for that, and it's one of the things that we'll be discussing. And lastly, trauma and resilience. Well, if you listen to the lectures about I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, you're probably tired of me talking about trauma, but this is the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences pyramid. We kind of looked at something like this before, but basically research shows that if you have adverse childhood experiences like abuse, like neglect, then that could lead to social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, which could then lead to the adoption of health risk behaviors. So drug use, risky sexual behaviors, compulsive overeating, things of that nature. Those could then lead to disease, disability, and social problems, which could then lead to an early death. So somewhere in here, in part because of her education, in part because of her resilience, Tara is able to kind of break apart from this. Having said that, I kind of will, to just kind of summarize these 2 points. I said this in the beginning, so I'm going to kind of bookend it. The incidents that she described definitely happened. She is writing the book not long after she graduated from college, I think in 2014 with her PhD. The book was published, I think, in 2018 or 2019, so a couple years after graduating. I don't know if she has enough time to completely understand how much she's been affected by the trauma. And because of that, I think that in some instances she gives them the benefit of the doubt because she doesn't quite have that perspective yet. But, you know, I don't say that to undercut the narrative, and she herself says, I wrote this to try to understand what I went through. So, yeah, I can't even, you know, point to a single passage, I don't think, where this happens. It's just that when she talks about her family, she's talking about how to understand them, and it's wonderful, and she has a lot of compassion and grace and obviously forgiveness for some of the things that happened. But I would love to hear something from her in 5 or 10 years when she's had more time to reflect, and possibly even after she has her own family, and has the experience of being a parent and kind of fully understanding what she may have missed out on. But the book as a whole is a really inspiring and incredible story of resilience and overcoming trauma. It has a very hopeful message. There are some parts that might be difficult to read, but I want you to really watch for things that Tara thinks, says, and does that demonstrate her ability to overcome the trauma. Education really obviously plays a role in her success, but what other factors are involved, and why, Anybody with adverse childhood experiences possibly could go to school and get out, but many other people could go to school and that would not help them at all. So what else is there in her story? What other factors are involved? Who helped her along the way? Who or what tried to sabotage her journey and stand between her and a better life? So these are some things to consider. And also, I really would like to know, do you feel like she has the perspective, or do you not? Is that something that I'm just picking up on, or do you guys kind of feel that same way too? I'll leave you with a quote from Tara. All of my father's stories were about our mountain, our valley, our jagged little patch of Idaho. He never told me what to do if I left the mountain, if I found myself in strange terrain. He never told me how I'd know when it was time to come home. So I'll leave you guys with that quote. Make sure you watch the video of her talking. It's amazing. I would watch it actually after you read the book, though, because there are a few spoilers of things that I didn't really get into the details of. So take a look for that. And I cannot wait to read your thoughts on this book. It's there's a lot there. It's an easy read, but there's a lot to it and a lot to discuss. So that's it. If you have any questions, as always, you can email me, and have a great day.